Buddha Gem, and this video is entitled Defending de Silva. I was tipped off to a very naughty Christian saying things that just weren't true about a book written by A.L. de Silva, a Buddhist critique of fundamentalist Christianity. Fellow YouTube user Bezel333, from here on out I'll just refer to him as Bezel, attempts to argue certain points made by de Silva. This video is to you, Gautama Guru. Thank you for the tip, brother. Before we begin, I'd just like to point out that the aim of de Silva's book was threefold. Firstly, it aims to critically examine the fundamentalist approach to Christianity and thereby highlight its many logical, philosophical, and ethical problems. The second aim of the book is to help fundamentalist Christians who might read it to understand why some people are not and will never be Christian. The third aim of the book is to awaken in Buddhists a deeper appreciation for their own religion. You'll find a link to this in the sidebar. Now, I have some minor criticisms or disagreements with this book, but for the most part, de Silva succeeds in his aims, and this is a wonderful book for any Buddhist or Christian to check out. In his critique, Bezel starts off with an interesting sleight of hand. He focuses on a part of a chapter headlined with the question, did Jesus exist? By only quoting part of the passage, he gives the viewer the distinct impression that de Silva is arguing that Jesus never existed. The key line that is omitted can be found at the end of this paragraph, where de Silva points out, and I quote, "It is not to say that Jesus didn't exist, but only that there is no independent evidence that he did." Bezel goes on to make the claim that Jesus did exist and provides the usual litany of sources, all of which have been thoroughly examined and discredited. To his credit, however, Bezel doesn't bring up the infamous passage in Josephus, but nevertheless, the sources he does use are just as spurious, just as questionable, and have all been discredited by now. So we'll take a look at those. But before we do that, I'd just like to reiterate what de Silva was saying, because it's important to understand. According to the Gospels, Jesus was a well-known figure in Israel. Given this claim, it is strange that he is not mentioned in any contemporary Hebrew, Latin, Aramaic, or Greek literature or inscriptions. Nothing. That is not to say that he didn't exist, but there is no independent evidence that he did. This is a well-known fact, even accepted by many Christians throughout the world. If you're not familiar with the sources quoted or mentioned, there will be links in the sidebars where you can learn more. But due to time constraints, I won't be able to quote the works extensively. We can start with the Roman Suetonius from 77 to 140 AD, who said, "Since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christus, he, the Emperor Claudius, expelled them from Rome." This couldn't refer to Jesus, because the name in the text is not Christus, but Christus, which by no means is the usual designation of Jesus. It was a common name, especially among Roman freedmen. Hence, the whole passage may have nothing to do with Christianity. And certainly no one's going to argue that Christ was inciting riots in Rome 15 years after he was supposedly crucified in Jerusalem. The passage contains no evidence for the historicity of Jesus, even if we substitute Christus for Christus. Christus is merely the Greek-Latin translation of Messiah, and the phrase at the instigation of Christus could refer to the Messiah generally, and not at all necessarily to the particular Messiah, Jesus, as an historical figure. Christus was not only a familiar personal name, it was also the name of the Egyptian Serapis or Osiris, who had a large following at Rome, especially among the common people. Hence, Christian may be either the followers of a man named Christus or of Serapis. Another author used to prove that Jesus existed is Pliny the Younger. In his correspondence with the Emperor Trajan around 113 AD, which is concerned with the question of how Pliny was to treat the Christians. There are a ton of problems with this source. To begin with, it proves nothing in regards to the existence of Jesus, but only affirms the existence of Christians. This letter is found in only one ancient copy of Pliny, and the genuineness of this correspondence of Pliny and Trajan is by no means certain. The tendency of the letters to put Christians in a favorable light as possible is too obvious not to elicit at least some suspicion. For these and other reasons, the correspondence was declared by experts to be spurious even at the time of its first publication in the 16th century. The undeniable fact is that some of the first Christians were among the greatest forgers who ever lived. This letter was first quoted by Tertullian, and the age immediately preceding him was known for fraudulent writings. Tertullian and Eusebius and the people that are in favor of this passage's genuineness are by no means reliable sources. Except for Josephus, probably no writer of antiquity has been more relied upon by apologists to prove the existence of Jesus than the Roman historian Tacitus. I don't have time to quote Tacitus here, so I'm just going to bring up some of the many problems with this claim. First, death by fire was not a form of punishment inflicted in Rome at the time of Nero. Tacitus is assumed to have written this about 117 AD, about 80 years after the death of Jesus, when Christianity was already an organized religion with a settled tradition. At least 3 of the Gospels are supposed to have been in existence by this time. So Tacitus might have derived his information about Jesus, if not directly from the Gospels, indirectly from them by means of oral tradition. Even if Tacitus wrote this passage, he could have received the information 100 years after the time from people who had told it to others. It doesn't matter whether or not this passage is genuine. In no other part of his writings did Tacitus make the least allusion to Christ or Christians. Tacitus is also made to say that Christians took their denomination from Christ, which could apply to any of the so-called Christs who were put to death in Judea, including Christ Jesus. The worshippers of the sun god Serapis were also called Christians. Serapis or Osiris had a large following at Rome, especially among the common people. The expression Christians, which Tacitus applies to the followers of Jesus, was by no means common in the time of Nero. Not a single Greek or Roman writer of the first century mentions the name. The Christians who call themselves Gizians, Nazarenes, the elect, the saints, the faithful, etc., were universally regarded as Jews. They observed the Mosaic law, and the people could not distinguish them from other Jews. The Greek word Christus, the anointed, for Messiah, and the derivative word Christian first came into use under Trajan in the time of Tacitus. Even then, however, the word Christus could not mean Jesus of Nazareth. All the Jews, without exception, looked forward to a Christus or Messiah. It is therefore not clear how the fact of being Christian could, in the time of Nero or of Tacitus, distinguish the followers of Jesus from other believers in a Christus or Messiah. Not one of the Gospels applies the name Christian to the followers of Jesus. It is never used in the New Testament as a description of themselves by the believers in Jesus. Most scholars admit that the works of Tacitus have not been preserved with any degree of fidelity. This passage, which could have served Christians writers better than any other writing of Tacitus, is not quoted by any of the Christian fathers. It is not quoted by Tertullian, though he often quoted the works of Tacitus. Tertullian's arguments called for the use of this passage with so loud a voice that its omission, had it existed, amounts to a violent improbability. Eusebius in the 4th century cited all the evidence of Christians from Jewish and pagan sources, but makes no mention of Tacitus. This passage is not quoted by Clement of Alexandria, who at the beginning of the 3rd century set himself entirely to the work of adducing and bringing together all the admissions and recognitions which pagan authors had made of the existence of Christ Jesus, or Christians before his time. Origen, in his controversy with Celsus, would undoubtedly have used it had it existed. There is no vestige or trace of this passage anywhere in the world before the 15th century. Its use as part of the evidence of the Christian religion is absolutely modern, although no reference whatsoever is made by any writer or historian, monkish or otherwise, before the 15th century. After that time it is quoted or referred to in an endless list of works. The fidelity of the passage rests entirely upon the fidelity of one individual, first published in a copy of the Annals of Tacitus in the year 1468 by Johann de Speyer of Venice, who took his imprint of it from a single manuscript, who would have every opportunity and inducement to insert such forgery. In all the Roman records, there was to be found no evidence that Christ was put to death by Pontius Pilate. If genuine, such a sentence would be the most important evidence in pagan literature. How could such evidence be overlooked for over 1,000 years? Understand that none of this is to make the claim that Jesus didn't exist. Understand that none of this is to make the claim that Jesus did not exist. But it is a fact that there is no independent evidence that he did. Basil either is not aware of this or he's being dishonest. Peace.